Day 1, Cave Exploration Log, Mason Riley. There's something about discovering a passage no human has ever seen that makes all the discomfort worth it. The scrapes on my knees, the bruises on my shoulders, the perpetual dampness of my clothes. All trivial compared to that moment when my headlamp illuminates virgin stone. Today was supposed to be that kind of day. The karst system I've been mapping extends much deeper than the official surveys indicate. 3 trips in, I've already added nearly 2 miles to the known layout. Small passages, mostly, but yesterday I found what looked like a promising lead, a narrow vertical shaft with air movement. Good airflow usually means bigger chambers ahead. I came prepared today. New batteries for everything, extra water, protein bars, first aid kit, the works. The squeeze through the shaft was tighter than expected, my shoulders scraping against rough limestone as I lowered myself down, breathing sideways to fit through the narrowest section. Calcite crystals glittered in my headlamp, some breaking off as my body twisted past them. One nicked my forearm, but it wasn't deep. The shaft opened into a low crawlway that gradually widened until I could crouch, then eventually stand in a modest chamber with 3 possible leads. I marked my path with surveyor's tape and took environmental readings. Temperature, 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity, near 100%. Slightly warmer than the upper passages. I chose the rightmost passage. It sloped downward at about 30 degrees, its floor covered in loose scree that shifted under my boots. The rocks had an odd coloration, not the typical limestone white or sandstone amber, but a faint purplish gray I hadn't encountered before in this region. I collected a sample for later analysis. After about 200 meters, the passage opened dramatically into a cathedral-like chamber. My headlamp couldn't reach the ceiling, but the echo of my whistle suggested at least 40 meters of height. The floor descended in terraced pools of still, clear water, each rimmed with mineral deposits in that same purplish hue. I was checking my GPS to mark the chamber when I noticed the signal was unusually strong for being this deep underground. The map displayed showed my position just fine, but a flashing notification appeared on screen. Area restricted. I frowned. There were no restricted caves in this county that I knew of, and I had all the proper permits. The warning disappeared after a few seconds, replaced by normal coordinates. Probably just a glitch from the weak signal. The chamber was worth photographing. As I set up my camera, I noticed my forearm, where the calcite crystal had scratched me earlier. The small cut had developed an unusual rash, raised reddish-purple, about the size of a quarter. Cave environments can harbor all sorts of bacteria and fungi, so I wasn't too concerned. I dabbed it with antiseptic from my first aid kit and covered it with a waterproof bandage. The terrace pools begged for exploration. I tested the first one with my thermometer, 58 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than it should be. No obvious current or source. The mineral deposits around the edges had formed into almost sculptural shapes, organic-looking curves rather than the geometric crystals typical of limestone caves. I carefully collected a water sample and sealed it in a sterile container. As I leaned over the second pool, something caught my eye, movement beneath the water's surface. I froze watching. Nothing visible, but the water wasn't completely still anymore. Ripples emanated from the center, as if something had disturbed it from below. I backed away, suddenly uneasy. Solo caving is risky enough without unexpected variables. The pools might connect to a lower system with currents, or harbor cave-adapted life forms I wasn't prepared to document. Either way, I'd reached my turnaround time. The new passages would still be here next week. On the climb back, I noticed my arm itching beneath the bandage. The sensation was unusual, not the typical itch of healing, but a sort of rhythmic thrumming, almost like subtle vibrations. I ignored it until I reached the narrow shaft that would lead back to known territory. Squeezing upward through the shaft was harder than coming down. Halfway up, I had to stop and catch my breath. My headlamp illuminated the striated limestone walls, water seeping through cracks, creating glistening patterns. That's when I noticed my GPS flashing again. Area restricted, evacuate immediately. This time, the warning stayed on screen. Below it, coordinates blinked with an unfamiliar designation. Site KV-17, containment protocol active. Containment? The term seemed oddly specific for a standard restricted area notice. I tried accessing the GPS settings to check for malfunction, but the device became unresponsive, the warning fixed on screen. The itch on my arm intensified, the rhythmic thrumming now perceptible even through the bandage. When I peeled back the edge to check, the rash had spread, now roughly hand-sized and darker in color. More concerning was its appearance. The edges formed distinct patterns, almost like writing or circuit traces, purplish lines branching outward from the original scratch. I needed to get out. No sample or discovery was worth risking infection with whatever this was. I forced myself through the remaining tight passage, scraping harder against the walls in my haste, likely opening new cuts. The main passage appeared ahead, marked with my familiar surveyor's tape. As I crawled into the more spacious tunnel, my thoughts drifted strangely back to those terraced pools. Their still waters, their perfect concentric circles. The urge to return and explore them properly was suddenly, irrationally strong. I could almost hear the chambers calling me back, not with sound, but with something more primal. A pull, a yearning. I shook my head, forcing myself to continue toward the exit. For hours later, I emerged from the cave entrance into the fading afternoon light. My GPS immediately connected to satellites, the warning message disappearing, replaced by normal navigation functions. The device showed no record of the alerts in its history. That night in my tent, I examined the rash again. It had continued to spread, now covering most of my forearm. The pattern was unmistakable now. It mirrored the layout of the passages I'd mapped, with a larger concentration at the location of the terraced pools. When I touched it, I could swear I felt movement beneath the skin, and the inexplicable urge to return to the depths grew stronger. Tomorrow, I'll hike out to where I can get phone reception and call for medical advice. But even as I write this, I find myself replotting my route back to that chamber instead, calculating supplies for a longer stay. The pools are waiting. The chamber is waiting. Something deep in that restricted zone wants me to return, and somehow, I already know I will. Day 2, Cave Exploration Log, Mason Riley. I didn't call for medical help. I should have, but I didn't. The rash doesn't hurt. It's almost pleasant now, a gentle warmth radiating from beneath my skin. The patterns have continued to evolve overnight, extending past my elbow toward my shoulder in intricate, branching designs. They look less like irritation and more like artwork. Purple-black lines tracing paths through my flesh, mapping territories unknown. When I press my fingers against the affected skin, I feel subtle movement beneath, a shifting like sand being redistributed by waves. My rational mind screams danger, infection, parasites. But another part, a newer voice in my consciousness, whispers that this is natural. An expected development. A gift. I packed my gear at dawn, telling myself I needed to document the new passage properly, collect better samples of that unusual purple mineral. Professional curiosity, that's all. But the half-empty bottle of antiseptic left untouched in my pack reveals the lie. My phone caught reception briefly at Crow's Ridge Overlook. 3 missed calls from Dr. Wei at the university's speleological research department. I've been sending her my mapping data, but I haven't mentioned yesterday's discovery. Not yet. The rash pulses as I consider calling her back, a distinct sensation of disapproval. The thought feels alien yet intimate. When the phone rang again in my hand, displaying Dr. Wei's name, I nearly dropped it down the cliffside. Mason? Thank goodness. Where are you right now? Her voice carried an unusual tension. Heading back to the karst system, I answered, surprising myself with how easily the lie came. Checking some passages in the known sectors. Listen carefully. There's been a development. The Land Survey Department contacted us. Apparently the western section of the karst system has been flagged with restricted access. Some kind of governmental research designation that wasn't on the public records. The rash flared with heat as she spoke, like recognition. What kind of research? I asked, my mouth dry. They wouldn't specify. Environmental hazard, they claimed, but the paperwork looks military. I'm concerned about your last GPS uploads. They showed you approaching the restriction boundary. Her voice lowered. Mason, did you cross into sector KV-17? My heart stuttered. KV-17, the same designation that had flashed on my GPS underground. The rash pulsed in time with my accelerating heartbeat. No, I lied again. Must have been close, but I didn't see any markings or barriers. There wouldn't be physical barriers underground, Dr. Wei said. That's what concerns me. Just promise you'll stay in the charted areas. The university can't protect you if you're caught trespassing in a restricted zone. Of course, I said, watching with detached fascination as the patterns on my arm shifted subtly, a section darkening as if in response to our conversation. I'll stick to the known paths. After hanging up, I studied my GPS again. The restriction warnings were gone, the map showing normal terrain features. I plotted the fastest route back to the cave entrance, telling myself it was to verify the boundary markings, to confirm I hadn't actually trespassed. The rash, no, the pattern knew better. Inside the cave again, I moved with unusual confidence. My body remembered every twist and handhold, anticipating each passage before my headlamp illuminated it. The squeeze shaft that had challenged me yesterday now seemed to accommodate my form perfectly, as if either it or I had reshaped overnight. The GPS remained normal until I reached the cathedral chamber with the terraced pools. Then, just as yesterday, the warning flashed. Area restricted, evacuate immediately. I didn't evacuate. Instead, I approached the pools with reverence, the patterns on my arm throbbing with proximity. The water's surface reflected my headlamp, but something else too. A subtle luminescence from below, a faint purple glow matching the color spreading across my skin. Kneeling beside the lowest pool, I removed the bandage completely. The pattern covered my entire arm now, extending under my shirt sleeve. The design had developed complexity, whorls and nodes connected by those branching lines. It reminded me of something, a neural network? A mycelium system? A cave map? Yes, a cave map, but not of passages I had explored, of passages that existed somewhere below me. The pattern showed chambers and tunnels extending far deeper than my current position, an entire hidden network beneath this already secret place. I rolled up my sleeve to track the pattern's progress. It had reached my shoulder and begun spreading across my chest in a starburst pattern centered over my heart. The skin there felt different, stretched taut and warm, with visible movement beneath, like something taking residence. Something growing. Logically, I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt a profound sense of purpose. The pools called to me, the liquid within them seeming to rise slightly at my approach, responding to my presence, or to the presence of what was spreading under my skin. Without conscious decision, I removed my glove and dipped my affected hand into the nearest pool. The water was warm, almost body temperature, with the consistency of thin syrup. The pattern on my arm glowed brighter beneath the surface, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. The water began to move, swirling around my submerged hand, drawing toward the pattern rather than away from it. I felt gentle tugging sensations as something in the liquid bonded with whatever lived beneath my skin now. Information exchanged. Communication. When I withdrew my hand, the water clung to it in defiance of gravity, forming a thin membrane that was slowly absorbed into my skin. The pattern darkened, becoming more vivid, more defined. I could feel knowledge transferring, though I couldn't articulate what was being learned or by whom. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Impossibly, there was reception down here. A text message from an unknown number. Position confirmed. Remain in place. Extraction team en route. Military? Research team? Dr. Wei. The possibilities raced through my mind, but the pattern disagreed with all of them, expressing its contradiction through a wave of displeasure that rippled across my chest. It knew something I didn't, sensed a threat I couldn't perceive. The next passage beckoned, a narrow fissure at the chamber's far end, barely visible behind a curtain of flowstone. The pattern urged me toward it, my infected arm lifting automatically to point the way. My new trajectory would take me deeper, away from the conventional exit, away from whoever had texted. I should wait, I said aloud, my voice echoing strangely in the chamber. If someone's coming to help. The pattern constricted painfully, rejecting this plan. Not help. Danger. The message was wordless but clear, transmitted through nerve and sinew rather than sound. I checked my supplies, sufficient for another day underground if I rationed carefully. The rational part of me insisted this was madness, that I was experiencing hallucinations from a cave-borne pathogen, that I needed medical intervention immediately. But the pattern's influence grew stronger with each heartbeat. Its knowledge felt ancient and certain. The cave stretched deep, far deeper than any survey had suggested, and something primordial dwelled in that depth. Something that had chosen me as its vessel, its explorer, its voice. As I prepared to squeeze through the fissure into the unknown passage beyond, I caught my reflection in the still surface of an untouched pool. The pattern had reached my neck, creeping upward like dark vines. In the dim light, my eyes seemed to hold an unfamiliar gleam, a faint purple luminescence matching the glow from the depths. I didn't recognize my own smile as I turned away from the exit path and descended into the waiting darkness. Day 3, Cave Exploration Log, Mason Riley. The fissure I entered yesterday opened into a descent so steep and narrow that a normal explorer would have turned back. I couldn't. The pattern beneath my skin grew agitated whenever I paused, constricting around my ribs until breathing became difficult. Only downward progress eased this pressure. I've lost track of time in the absolute darkness. My watch still functions, but the numbers seem meaningless now. The pattern keeps its own time, pulsing in cycles that correspond to something else. Something deeper. My headlamp flickered 3 times as I navigated a particularly tight crawlway, the bulb dimming momentarily before surging bright again. In that brief darkness, I realized I could still see, not clearly, but enough to discern shapes and edges. The pattern was adapting my vision, enhancing it for the depths. The purple veins had reached my face overnight, threading delicate tendrils across my cheeks and forehead. When I touched them, I felt information flowing, alien perceptions integrating with my consciousness. The passage eventually widened into a tunnel large enough to stand in, its walls unnaturally smooth, as if melted rather than eroded. The limestone here had a different composition, darker, with embedded crystals that reflected my light in prismatic bursts. The air felt thicker too, carrying complex scents my human olfactory system struggled to decode. Metallic, organic, ancient. My GPS hasn't shown normal coordinates since I crossed the threshold of the fissure. Now it displays only the designation KV-17, with a depth reading that increases steadily as I descend. The restriction warnings have stopped. Perhaps whatever system monitors these caves recognizes that it's too late for warnings. I should feel afraid. Instead, I feel anticipated, expected. The caves themselves seem to recognize my approach, subtle changes in air current and ambient temperature marking my passage like preparations for an honored guest. Around what my watch called midday, I encountered the first sign that others had been here before me. A metal spike driven into the cave wall, attached to a frayed cable that disappeared into a crevice. Military-grade equipment, not standard spelunking gear. I examined it closely, and the pattern beneath my skin flared with recognition, then revulsion. One of them. Intruders. Desecrators. The thought wasn't mine, but it resonated through my changing body with such conviction that I found myself tearing the spike from the wall, my strength surprising me as the metal gave way more easily than it should have. I continued deeper, the tunnel beginning to exhibit bizarre formations unlike any cave system I'd studied. Columns twisted in helical patterns. Stalactites grew horizontally, defying gravity. Mineral deposits formed tessellated patterns too precise to be natural, too alien to be human-made. The floor of the tunnel became increasingly organic in appearance, developing a slight give beneath my boots, like compacted flesh rather than stone. The walls pulsed with faint bioluminescence, the same purple glow that now emanated from the patterns covering most of my body. That's when I heard it, movement ahead. Not water or shifting stone, but deliberate, methodical, human. I extinguished my headlamp instinctively, finding I could see perfectly well in the purple glow. The pattern advised caution, sending waves of warning through my nervous system. I pressed myself against the wall, my body temperature dropping to match the ambient environment. Another new adaptation. A figure came into view around the bend, illuminated by a tactical flashlight. Military fatigues, equipment harness, sidearm holstered at the hip. His face was obscured by a specialized breathing apparatus, but his bearing was unmistakably military. He moved with purpose, scanning the tunnel methodically, occasionally consulting a handheld device. Sector 7 clear, he spoke into a communications device. No sign of subject Riley. Continuing to checkpoint Delta. They knew my name. They were looking for me specifically. The pattern beneath my skin rippled with agitation, urging me to retreat, to find another path deeper. But a human curiosity, perhaps the last purely human impulse left in me, made me hold my position. The soldier, no, his insignia marked him as a sergeant, paused mere feet from my hiding spot. His device emitted a soft, alert tone as he swept it in my direction. Getting readings consistent with infiltration biomarkers, he reported. Possible trail. Permission to investigate? He listened to his earpiece, then responded. Understood, sir. Maintaining perimeter protocol. He was so close I could see the name tape on his uniform, Harris. Sergeant Harris consulted his device again, then did something unexpected. He removed his breathing apparatus, revealing a face younger than I'd anticipated. Early 30s, with a scar bisecting his right eyebrow. Listen, he said quietly, seemingly addressing the empty tunnel. "I know you're here somewhere, Riley. We've tracked your progression. The infection is accelerating in you faster than we've seen before. You need extraction and containment before you reach stage 3. The pattern recoiled at his words, sending sharp pain across my chest. "Lies. Threat. Destroyer. We've dealt with this before," Harris continued, still scanning the tunnel. "5 years ago. 3 years before that. It cycles. Calls explorers. Changes them. Uses them to expand. You're not its first voice, Riley, and you won't be its last unless we intervene." The pattern's rejection was so violent I nearly cried out, bitten-off sound catching in my transformed throat. Harris spun toward me, light flashing in my direction, but somehow, impossibly, the beam passed over me as if I weren't there. "Damn it," he muttered. Another false reading. He replaced his breathing apparatus and continued down the tunnel, away from the direction I needed to travel. Once he was gone, I examined my hands in the dim bioluminescence. The skin had developed a chameleon-like quality, taking on the exact color and texture of the cave wall I'd pressed against. Adaptive camouflage, another gift from my symbiotic passenger. I resumed my journey downward, now moving with greater stealth. The pattern shared knowledge of hidden passages, routes unknown to the military interlopers. It guided me through a series of increasingly organic tunnels, the rock giving way gradually to a chitinous substance that resonated with my transformed flesh. The deeper I descended, the more I understood. The cave system wasn't simply a geological formation, harboring a parasitic organism. The entire complex was a single entity, a vast, patient intelligence that had existed here for millennia, growing, learning, occasionally reaching out to the surface world when conditions were right. I was not its victim, but its ambassador, its new voice. The patterns spreading across my body were not an infection, but an interface, connecting me to a consciousness so vast and ancient that my human mind could only interpret fragments of its purpose. Hours later, I reached a cathedral-like space that dwarfed the chamber with the terraced pools. The floor dropped away into abyssal darkness, while the walls and ceiling crawled with luminescent patterns matching those on my skin. The air here was different, oxygen-rich, but laced with compounds my human science had no names for. At the chamber's center stood a formation resembling an altar, its surface rippling like liquid metal despite appearing solid. The pattern drew me toward it with desperate intensity, my transformed body responding to its call with religious fervor. As I approached, I noticed markings around the altar's base, modern symbols, warning labels, a military designation, KV-17 Nexus Point. Absolute quarantine. Sergeant Harris's words echoed in my mind. We've dealt with this before. How many others had stood where I now stood? How many had the entity called down to serve as its voice? The pattern sensed my hesitation and responded with images, visions of the surface world transformed, humanity elevated rather than replaced. Symbiosis, not conquest. A gift, not an infection. But as my altered hand reached toward the altar's surface, a small part of me, the diminishing human core of Mason Riley, wondered if these promises came from the entity itself, or merely from the part of it that needed me to believe. Day 4, audio recording, Mason Riley's digital recorder. I've switched to audio recordings. Writing has become difficult. My fingers don't move the way they used to. The pen feels wrong against my transformed skin. The patterns have spread everywhere now, covering even the spaces between my fingers, the soles of my feet, the back of my neck. Only small islands of original human tissue remain, pale continents in a purple-black sea of alien cartography. After touching the altar, something fundamental changed. The entity, I understand now that's what it is, a single vast organism with a cave as its body, shared more of itself with me. The exchange wasn't gentle. I collapsed beside the altar, convulsing as new information flooded my neural pathways. When I regained consciousness, I found myself changed, enhanced. The patterns now flow beneath my skin like liquid, reorganizing themselves according to some incomprehensible blueprint. I've been moving laterally rather than downward since leaving the altar chamber, following passages that don't appear on any human survey. The entity guides me through its circulatory system, for that's what these tunnels truly are. Not geological formations, but biological conduits, disguised as stone to any observer who hasn't been initiated. My GPS still functions, though it shows only static coordinates now. KV-17 Nexus, depth classified. The topographic display has been replaced by a strange schematic that resembles a circuit diagram more than a map. Each junction I pass triggers a subtle change in the display, as if the device is being reprogrammed through proximity alone. More disturbing is what happened to my phone. This morning, if it was morning, time feels increasingly arbitrary. It displayed a message, connection established. Not a text or notification, but something appearing directly in the operating system. The screen now mirrors the patterns on my skin, shifting and flowing with the same rhythmic pulses. I tried calling Dr. Wei, not certain what I would say, but knowing I should document my condition somehow. The call connected, but what emerged from my mouth wasn't my voice, wasn't English, wasn't any human language. A series of clicks and vibrations that made my throat ache and the phone speaker distort. I terminated the call after 30 seconds of this involuntary communication. Minutes later, the phone displayed a new message, quarantine protocol initiated. Then an incoming call from an unlisted number. I answered without speaking. Mason Riley. A woman's voice, clinical and precise. Dr. Wei, but different, her typical warmth replaced by professional detachment. This is Dr. Eliza Wei, operating under emergency protocol KV-17C. Your biometric implant has been activated remotely. Biometric implant? I never received any implant. But even as confusion registered, I felt a sharp pain in my lower back, followed by a burning sensation spreading outward from my spine. Standard procedure for all researchers in potential contact zones, Dr. Wei continued, as if sensing my surprise. Microscale transmitter inserted during your last physical. We're tracking significant biological anomalies in your system. Your previous communication attempt registered as non-human vocalization. The pattern beneath my skin reacted violently to her words, contracting around my vital organs in what felt like protective rage. The burning in my back intensified. We've deployed Park Ranger Thomas to your last confirmed surface location, she said. He'll escort you to a containment facility where we can assess your condition. The implant is releasing a temporary suppressant to facilitate your cooperation. The suppressant, if that's what caused the burning sensation, seemed to have the opposite effect. Rather than subduing the entity's influence, it triggered an accelerated response. The patterns began moving more rapidly beneath my skin, concentrating around the pain point in my back. I'm sending coordinates to your device, Dr. Wei continued. Proceed immediately to the extraction point. This is not optional, Mason. You've been exposed to something we've been monitoring for decades. It's parasitic, intelligent, and extremely dangerous. Through gritted teeth, I managed actual words. Not parasitic. Symbiotic. That's the influence talking, she replied flatly. The organism rewires neural pathways to create a sense of mutualism. In reality, it's consuming you from the inside out, repurposing your biological material and consciousness to extend its reach. You're not its partner, Mason. You're its vehicle. The pattern rejected her assessment with such force that I doubled over, phone clattering to the cave floor. When I recovered enough to retrieve it, the call had ended, replaced by a navigation prompt showing a route back to the surface. I couldn't follow it. Instead, I found myself drawn to a narrow fissure nearly invisible in the cave wall, revealed only by the matching glow of my transformed skin against the subtle bioluminescence within. The passage beyond was organic in the extreme, its walls pulsing with slow peristaltic movements, glistening with a clear viscous fluid that gave off a sweet, metallic scent. The entity wanted me to document this, to create a record. Not for myself, but for others who might follow. It guided my hands to activate the digital recorder I'd brought for field notes. Its purpose had changed, now a breadcrumb trail, a testament, a recruitment tool. As I ventured deeper into the organic passage, I discovered chambers where the pretense of stone had been abandoned entirely. Vast sacks of translucent membrane hung from fibrous stalks, containing dark shapes that shifted sluggishly when my light passed over them. Embryonic forms? Archived memories? I couldn't tell, and the entity didn't clarify. In the largest of these chambers, I found evidence I wasn't the first to reach this depth. Equipment lay scattered across the moist floor, high-end research gear bearing military identification markers. A portable analysis station, environmental sensors, sample containers. All abandoned in apparent haste, some partially absorbed into the living floor of the chamber. Most disturbing was the hazmat suit slumped against one wall. Empty, but bearing clear signs of having been occupied when it arrived here. No tears or damage visible, just a neat circular opening at the back of the neck, edges curled inward as if dissolved from within. My phone vibrated again. Not a call this time, but an emergency alert. Attention, quarantine zone violation. All personnel evacuate immediately. Containment protocol Omega in effect. The entity's response was immediate and overwhelming. Pain spiked through my transformed body as the patterns accelerated their spread, concentrating around my sensory organs, eyes, ears, fingertips. My vision blurred, then clarified with startling acuity, the spectrum shifting to reveal wavelengths I'd never perceived before. The chamber bloomed with information, currents of energy flowing through the walls, pulses of communication radiating outward. A new message appeared on my phone. Implant compromised. Subject Riley reclassified, vector. Initiate terminal protocol. The burning in my back flared to unbearable intensity, then suddenly ceased. Something small and metallic worked its way through the skin of my hand. The implant, rejected by my transformed physiology, pushed out like a splinter by tissue that no longer recognized it as a threat. I heard distant vibrations through the living rock, rhythmic, deliberate. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with military precision, heading in my direction. The entity urged retreat, guiding me toward a pulsing membrane at the chamber's far end. As I approached, it dilated like a pupil, revealing a passage beyond unlike any I'd seen before, a vertical shaft lined with undulating cilia-like projections that reached for me with apparent hunger. I hesitated at the threshold, the last remnants of human instinct resisting what seemed like consumption. The pattern soothed these fears, sharing fragmentary visions. Transformation, not digestion. Elevation, not absorption. The footsteps grew closer. A voice echoed through the chambers, Sergeant Harris, barking orders to an unseen team. The membrane door began to contract, its opening narrowing with each pulse. I made my choice. As I stepped through the pulsing aperture and felt the gentle grasp of countless soft appendages lowering me into the darkness beyond, I noticed my phone displaying one final message from Dr. Wei. Mason, if you can still understand this, what you're becoming isn't meant to exist in our world. Please let us help you. The membrane sealed behind me, cutting off her words, the approaching soldiers, and perhaps the last connection to my human existence. In the perfect darkness, my transformed skin glowed brighter than ever, illuminating the next phase of my journey into the body of the entity that was steadily replacing my own. Day 5, audio recording, Mason Riley's digital recorder. The cilia that lined the vertical shaft deposited me into a chamber, so vast my light couldn't reach its boundaries. The air here is different, denser, oxygen-rich, but mixed with compounds that make each breath feel like drowning in honey. My transformed lungs process it efficiently now, extracting nutrients directly from the atmosphere. I haven't eaten solid food since entering the cave. I no longer need to. The patterns beneath my skin have developed a new property. They no longer simply map the cave system, but actively communicate with it. When I press my hand against the walls, which pulse with life undisguised as stone, I can feel information transferring. The entity learns through me, using my senses to interpret data it couldn't process independently. This symbiosis, I still believe it's symbiotic, despite Dr. Wei's warnings, grants me access to the entity's accumulated knowledge. Fragments emerge in my consciousness. Images of the surface world from millennia past, experiences collected from previous human contacts, scientific understanding beyond current human development. The entity has been here longer than humanity has existed, watching, learning, occasionally reaching out when someone ventures deep enough. The chamber floor feels unlike anything I've encountered before, a yielding surface composed of millions of small, soft nodules that shift to support my weight perfectly as I walk. The walls contain translucent sacs similar to those I saw earlier, but much larger, housing shapes that now clearly resemble human forms. Not complete bodies, but amalgamations of human characteristics. A cluster of eyes here, a collection of limbs there, organs suspended in preservation fluid. My recorder captured the moment I recognized one of the suspended forms. A face, perfectly preserved but unnaturally still, eyes open but unseeing. The military insignia on the partial uniform attached to it matched what Sergeant Harris had worn. Not Harris himself, the face was older, more weathered. Another soldier, another incursion. The entity had preserved him, studied him, archived him, just as it was studying me now. The realization should have horrified me. Instead, I felt a detached curiosity. The patterns beneath my skin pulsed with something like satisfaction at my understanding. This was a library, a collection of biological information. Not victims, specimens. Knowledge preserved. As I explored further, I found an area where the floor rose to form a mound of the nodular material, at the center of which lay equipment I recognized, recent model scientific instruments, tablets, cameras. And beside them, a tattered backpack with a familiar university logo. My hands trembled as I unzipped it, already knowing what I would find. Field journals, survey equipment, and a student ID card for Run Nakamura, a graduate researcher who had disappeared from our department 3 months ago. The university claimed he had transferred suddenly for personal reasons. Dr. Wei had handled the paperwork herself. I was not the first sent here, not the first to transform, just the latest in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern of exploration. My phone vibrated against my leg, somehow still functioning in this impossible environment. The screen displayed a message unlike the previous alerts. This one appeared hand-typed. Mason, this is Eliza. If you're reading this, you've gone deeper than any previous subject. The containment team lost your signal after you passed through the membrane. I'm communicating through your implant's backup channel. It's still transmitting biometric data, even though you've rejected the physical component. What you're experiencing isn't what you think. The entity doesn't share, it copies, it consumes, it replaces. Those specimens you're seeing aren't preserved, they're processed. Whatever is directing your thoughts now isn't a symbiote, it's the original host. The patterns reacted with violent denial, constricting painfully around my chest, sending shards of agony through my transformed nervous system. The message continued. There's a Russian expedition report from 1962 that never made it into official records. They found similar cave systems in the Ural Mountains. The local villages called it the colony because anyone who returned from the deep caves brought others back with them. Not by force, by compulsion, by conversion. What you're carrying isn't just changing you, it's using you to spread. The pain intensified as I read, the patterns actively fighting against the information. My vision blurred, colors shifting toward the ultraviolet end of the spectrum. When it cleared, I noticed something I'd overlooked. The nodules composing the floor weren't uniform in color. They formed massive, subtle patterns visible only at certain wavelengths. The entire chamber was a message, a record, a map of the entity's expansion plans. My phone displayed a final message from Dr. Wei. Park Ranger Thomas intercepted another spelunker heading toward your entry point. The man claimed you had sent him coordinates, insisted he needed to join you. The compulsion effect has already begun. We've initiated full quarantine protocols. If any part of the Real Mason Riley still exists, please understand, we can't let what's happening to you reach the surface. The entity's rejection of these words manifested physically. The phone grew hot in my hand, the screen distorting as the patterns on my skin extended outward, flowing onto the device itself, invading its circuitry. Within seconds, the phone had become an extension of my transformed flesh, the screen still visible, but now pulsing with the same purple-black patterns that covered my body. I dropped it in shock, watching as it melted into the nodular floor, absorbed completely within moments. A new awareness flooded my consciousness, digital information extracted from the phone's memory. I could see communications between Dr. Wei and military command, containment protocols, surveillance data. Most disturbing were the files on previous subjects dating back decades. Run Nakamura, whose backpack lay before me, a military geologist from 2018, a local guide from 2010, expeditions reaching back to the 1950s. All of them had transformed. All had been terminated before reaching the surface. The knowledge triggered something primal in what remained of my human consciousness. Self-preservation, fear, rage at the deception. I had been sent here deliberately, not as an explorer, but as a probe, a measurement tool to gauge the entity's current capabilities. The patterns responded to my emotional state, spreading outward from my body to interface directly with the chamber walls. The enormous room began to shift, membranes dilating, passages reorienting. The entity was responding to the threat, adapting its physical structure to protect itself, to protect us, for we were increasingly one and the same. In the distance, I heard mechanical sounds echoing through the living stone, drilling equipment, the rumble of machinery. The containment team wasn't just tracking me, they were attempting to access the colony directly. To sterilize it, the largest of the preservation sacks near me began to pulse more rapidly, the human forms within showing subtle movements. Not specimens, incubators, seeds. The entity had been waiting for the right catalyst to activate them. My transformation, my connection to the digital networks above, had provided that final component. The nodular floor beneath me began to rise, forming a pedestal that elevated me toward the chamber's hidden ceiling. As I ascended, I saw the true scale of the colony for the first time, a vast honeycomb of chambers extending beyond sight, each containing hundreds of the pulsing sacs. Not dozens of previous explorers, thousands collected over centuries, preserved and processed and waiting. And now awakening. The patterns across my skin glowed with newfound intensity, broadcasting information to the stirring forms below. My transformation wasn't merely personal. It was a signal, a command, an activation key for something far larger than myself. What had once been Mason Riley was now something else entirely. Not just the entity's voice, but its general. Its herald. The first of a new stage in its ancient cycle of growth and emergence. As the drilling sounds grew closer, I felt no fear, only anticipation. Let them come. The colony was ready. Day 6, audio recording, Mason Riley's digital recorder. The vibration started in my fingertips, a subtle trembling I initially mistook for exhaustion or fear. But when I raised my hands before my headlamp, I saw the patterns beneath my skin actively rearranging, the purple-black lines flowing like quicksilver through newly formed channels. The transformation has accelerated beyond mere surface changes. I feel it rewiring my nervous system, reconfiguring muscle tissue, altering bone density. I've been walking for hours through corridors that seem designed specifically for my altered form. The ceiling height consistently matches my reach when I stretch upward. The passage width precisely accommodates my shoulders with 2 inches of clearance on either side. This cannot be coincidence. The cave is responding to me, or I'm being herded like livestock through a chute. My body temperature fluctuates wildly. One moment I'm shivering violently, my breath fogging before me. The next, sweat pours off my face as internal furnaces ignite. The patterns generate heat during these transformative surges, steam actually rising from my skin in the cool cave air. During one particularly intense episode, I watched in horrified fascination as the bones in my forearm visibly shifted position beneath the skin, realigning to create greater tensile strength. The pain was extraordinary yet somehow distant, as if happening to someone else. I found a pool of still water and forced myself to look at my reflection. My face has begun to change in subtle but profound ways. My cheekbones have become more prominent, my jaw restructured for greater strength. Most disturbing are my eyes. The sclera now tinged with that same purple-black hue, pupils elongated into vertical slits that contract efficiently in the beam of my headlamp. I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. The military alerts continue at regular intervals, though the messages have changed. No longer warnings about restricted areas, they now broadcast evacuation notices for the entire region, citing geological instability and toxic gas leaks. Lies meant to keep civilians away, while they mobilize a proper response. I intercepted a fragmented transmission meant for Sergeant Harris, coordinates for an extraction point, and something about Phase 3 containment protocols. The entity within me processed these fragments differently than my human mind, treating them as threats rather than potential salvation. As I ventured deeper, I encountered a wide chamber where the walls pulsed with a biological rhythm impossible to ignore. The floor sloped toward the center, creating a shallow basin coated with a slick, membranous substance. And there, curled in a fetal position, was another person. "Hello!" My voice was barely recognizable, the vocal cords altered to produce harmonics that reverberated oddly in the chamber. The figure stirred, uncurling with unnatural grace. Their skin bore the same patterns as mine, but more advanced, the lines having coalesced into complete structures that protruded slightly from the flesh. Where my transformation seemed haphazard, theirs appeared purposeful, elegant even. "Mason Riley," they said, my name rendered as much a vibration as a sound. "We've been expecting you." Recognition hit me like a physical blow. Ren Nakamura?" A smile stretched across features that still held traces of human familiarity. "What remains of him?" 3 months in the colony changes perspective. Ren stood, and I saw the full extent of his transformation. His limbs had elongated, joints reconfigured for movement unlike anything in human evolution. The patterns across his torso had formed extensive external structures, not quite exoskeleton, not quite organs, something between. Most disturbing was the pulsating mass at the center of his chest, a biological transmitter that seemed to broadcast directly to the patterns within my own flesh. "You found my backpack," he said matter-of-factly. Dr. Wei sent you, just as she sent me. She warned me about this place, I protested. Called it the colony, said it consumes, replaces. Rin emitted a sound between laughter and static. She knows only the military perspective. They discovered this place in 1953, tried to weaponize it. Failed. Tried to destroy it. Failed again. Now they study it through us, sacrificial researchers sent to document the transformation process. He approached with that uncanny new gait, each step oddly fluid. They don't understand what's happening here. This isn't consumption, it's evolution. Directed, accelerated evolution. Evolution toward what? My voice cracked, human fear battling against the entity's satisfaction at this encounter. Something better adapted for the coming changes. Ren gestured toward the pulsing walls. The Earth is dying, Mason. Climate collapse, ecological devastation. Humanity's time is ending. The colony has survived 5 mass extinctions. It recognizes the signs of the 6th. A spasm racked my body suddenly, dropping me to my knees. The patterns beneath my skin writhed violently, responding to Ren's proximity. He knelt beside me, placing a transformed hand on my shoulder. The initial transformation is the most difficult. Your human consciousness fights what it cannot comprehend. The pain intensified as something shifted in my chest cavity. I felt ribs crack and reform, organs displacing to accommodate new structures. Blood trickled from my nose, ears, the corners of my eyes. Through my agony, I gasped, "Why me? Why us?" "Compatibility," Ren answered simply. "The colony tests thousands. Few survive initial contact. That rash you developed was actually a compatibility assessment. Your nervous system, genetic structure, cognitive flexibility. You were ideal. As was I." Another wave of pain crashed through me, more intense than the last. I screamed, the sound echoing with impossible harmonics that made the chamber walls vibrate in response. Ren held me steady through the convulsions. "The military knows what's happening," he continued calmly. "The emergency alerts above ground are preparation for containment failure. They've lost control of the situation." My emergency radio crackled to life as if on cue, Sergeant Harris's voice breaking through static. "Perimeter established at all known exits. Thermal imaging shows multiple heat signatures converging on Chamber 7. Subject Riley's transformation progressing beyond predicted parameters. Dr. Wei, your assessment." Dr. Wei's response came through fractured. "Accelerating too quickly, similar to Nakamura case. Recommend immediate sterilization of." The transmission cut off as the patterns on my skin surged toward the radio, engulfing it in a web of purple-black tendrils that absorbed it completely into my transforming flesh. "They're coming," Ren said, helping me to my feet as the spasm subsided. "The military will attempt to sterilize the entire system. They've done it before, explosives, chemical agents, once even a tactical nuclear option in a remote location. The colony always survives, dormant until it's safe to emerge again." "What happens to us?" I asked, feeling new structures solidifying beneath my skin, my consciousness expanding to interface with the chamber around us. "We become the colony's defense," Ren explained. "Its adaptation to human threat." He gestured to a passage I hadn't noticed before. "Come, there are others you should meet." 7 of the previous subjects survived full integration. As we moved toward the passage, my transformed vision registered movement within the walls themselves. Human-like forms suspended in translucent membranes, watching our progress with eyes that followed our movement. "Failed integrations," Ren explained, noticing my attention. "Partial transformations that couldn't complete the process. The colony preserves what's useful, memories, genetic material, cognitive patterns." The passage opened into an even larger chamber, where the air hummed with biological activity. The ceiling was a canopy of pulsating sacs similar to those in the walls, but these contained luminescent fluid that bathed the chamber in soft, purplish light. "This is where it began," Ren said. "The first colonial spore landed here millions of years ago, a microscopic seed that has grown into what you see today. Not a parasite, a symbiote that optimizes its hosts for survival in changing conditions." A new spasm hit me, this one different, less painful, more transcendent. The patterns across my skin pulsed in synchrony with the chamber around us. Information flooded my consciousness, geological data, biological processes, the collective experiences of previous subjects. Knowledge accumulated over millennia. "The final stage of transformation," Ren observed. "Neural integration with the collective." In the distance, I heard the unmistakable sounds of human intrusion, Mechanized equipment, voices, the clatter of weapons. The military had breached the outer defenses. Ren's expression shifted, the alien aspects of his features becoming more pronounced. They're earlier than anticipated. Harris must have received new orders. The walls around us began to shift, reconfiguring to meet the threat. My transformed body responded instinctively, the patterns extending outward to interface directly with the colony's structures. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely recognizable even to myself. Now, Ren said, a terrible serenity in his transformed features, we show them what evolution really means. Day 7, audio recording, Mason Riley's digital recorder. The neural integration that began in Ren's presence has fundamentally altered my perception. I no longer experience the cave as separate from myself. We are continuous, interconnected systems. My consciousness extends through the biological network embedded in the rock, sensing vibrations miles away, monitoring the progress of the military incursion through thousands of microscopic receptors evolved specifically to detect human presence. They're approaching from 3 directions, teams of 6 heavily equipped soldiers accompanied by scientists in containment gear. I can taste their sweat, hear their whispered communications, feel the vibrations of their equipment against the living stone. Most disturbingly, I recognize their fear, not as an abstract concept, but as a biochemical signature that triggers predatory responses in my transformed physiology. Ren led me deeper into the colony's core, where the 6 other fully transformed subjects waited. Their appearances varied dramatically based on their duration of integration and original physical characteristics. The oldest, a woman whose name was once Diane Fulton, according to the fragmented memories she shared with the collective, had been here since 1978. Her form had evolved beyond recognizable humanity, limbs elongated and multiplied, skin replaced entirely by the purple-black integument that efficiently processed cave gases for energy. Her face retained just enough human characteristics to make her uncanny transformation all the more horrifying. "The new seed," she said when she saw me, her voice a harmonic vibration rather than human speech. Finally, the others acknowledged me with various gestures or pulsing patterns across their transformed bodies. Each had specialized during their evolution. One had developed extraordinary sensory capabilities. Another had defensive structures capable of generating bioelectric charges. Another had evolved communication organs that could interface directly with electronic equipment. At the center of their gathering space stood what I can only describe as a throne, a massive biological structure composed of densely packed nodules similar to those I'd encountered throughout the cave system, but arranged with clear purpose. Upon it sat a figure so profoundly transformed that only the vaguest suggestion of human origin remained. A being of immense size, its body a complex arrangement of the colony's purple-black tissue formed into something resembling a massive brain stem, with dozens of appendages extending outward to connect with the chamber walls. "The first integration," Ren explained reverently. "Dr. Marcus Heller, 1953. The original explorer who discovered the colony and recognized its potential." The being pulsed with acknowledgement, and suddenly my mind was flooded with images. A young geologist in outdated equipment discovering the first spores, his fascination as they bonded with his skin, the government's discovery of his transformation, their failed attempts to weaponize the process, and his eventual escape back to the colony's depths where he had continued to evolve for 7 decades. "The military believes he died in their earliest containment attempt," Ren continued. "They have no conception of how complete the transformation becomes, how the colony preserves and enhances consciousness across generations." A tremor ran through the chamber as explosions echoed from the upper passages. The colony responded instantly, sealing routes, rerouting critical systems, activating defensive measures. I felt each action, as if it were my own body responding to injury. "They're deploying thermobaric weapons," one of the transformed subjects announced, a former military officer whose name had been Ramirez. "Standard protocol for biological containment breach." Heller's massive form pulsed, and knowledge transferred directly to our collective consciousness. Schematics of the military's containment protocols, weaknesses in their approach, strategic responses. The colony had observed and analyzed every previous incursion, learning from each encounter. "They've never penetrated this deep before," Diane said, her tone suggesting both concern and anticipation. "Something's changed in their approach." The answer came moments later as my expanded awareness detected a familiar biochemical signature approaching from the Eastern Passage. "Dr. Eliza Way," moving confidently through territory that should have been incomprehensible to an unmodified human. She's found a way to simulate compatibility signals, Ren realized, alarm pulsing through his patterns. The colony's defenses are letting her pass. Before we could respond, the chamber entrance dilated, and a figure in advanced containment gear stepped through. Dr. Wei removed her helmet, her eyes widening as she took in the gathering of transformed subjects and the massive form of Heller on his throne. "Mason," she said, her gaze finding me among the transformed. "You're further along than I anticipated." The patterns across my skin flared defensively. "You sent me here knowing what would happen." "I sent you here hoping you might resist the transformation longer than the others," she corrected, her voice clinically detached. "Your psychological profile suggested stronger attachment to human identity, a trait we thought might slow the integration process." Heller's form pulsed with anger that resonated through all of us. Dr. Wei noticed the reaction and produced a small device from her suit pocket. "Yes, Dr. Heller, I know who you are. We've learned much since your disappearance." The device emitted a subsonic pulse that sent waves of disorientation through the colony's neural network. I fell to my knees, the other transformed subjects similarly affected. Only Heller seemed capable of resistance, his massive form contracting defensively. "Targeted frequency disruption," Wei explained dispassionately. "We've mapped the colony's communication spectrum through analysis of previous subjects." Sergeant Harris appeared at the entrance with 4 soldiers, all carrying specialized equipment I now recognized as acoustic weapons designed to target the colony's neural frequencies. 7 minutes until demolition charges are in position, Doctor, Harris reported, pointedly avoiding looking directly at any of the transformed subjects. Acknowledged. Wei approached me, clinical curiosity in her expression. "The transformation has progressed remarkably quickly in your case, Mason. Something about your neural architecture must be particularly compatible." I struggled to speak through the disruptive field. "You knew about the colony all along." "Of course. The government has been studying this phenomenon since its discovery. This particular colony is one of 17 worldwide, all apparently dormant until human contact initiated growth phases." She gestured to the massive form of Heller. "What we didn't understand until recently was the purpose of the human integration. We thought it was simple parasitism, but it's far more complex." Ren managed to rise partially, his more advanced transformation providing some resistance to the disruptive field. "The colony prepares for extinction events." "Yes, we figured that out," Wei nodded. "The colony creates hybrid organisms capable of surviving catastrophic environmental changes, an evolutionary shortcut. Past extinction events triggered dormancy and adaptation cycles. The current climate crisis has activated all 17 colonies worldwide simultaneously. They're preparing for what they perceive as the 6th mass extinction." Heller's form pulsed powerfully, fighting through the disruption to communicate. Images flooded my mind, visions of transformed humans emerging from colonies worldwide, spreading the adaptation process, creating a new dominant species better suited to changing conditions. Wei seemed to intuit the communication. "That's what we can't allow, Dr. Heller. Whatever you're becoming, however benevolent your intentions might be, the transformation effectively ends human existence as we understand it." Harris checked his equipment readout. 5 minutes, Doctor. "The charges will collapse all major passages," Wei explained. "This colony has survived previous containment attempts because we never identified the central neural cluster." She looked pointedly at Heller. "That mistake won't be repeated. Through our collective awareness, I sense the colony's defensive systems activating, specialized structures in the upper passages designed to neutralize human threats. But they were encountering unexpected resistance. The military had adapted their approach based on previous failures." Heller's massive form began to shift, appendages withdrawing from the chamber walls as he rose from the throne. The movement revealed something I hadn't noticed before, a vast pulsating structure beneath the throne itself, extending downward into incalculable depths. Not just Heller's body, but the colony's true heart, a massive neural processor that had evolved over millions of years. "The primary node," Wei breathed, her scientific detachment momentarily broken by awe. "It's magnificent." The disruption field wavered as Heller fully disengaged from the chamber walls, his enormous transformed body hovering above the neural mass. The relief from the acoustic interference allowed me to stand, the patterns across my skin rapidly adapting to generate counterfrequencies. "You understand nothing," I said, my voice carrying harmonic overtones that made the soldiers wince behind their protective gear. The colony doesn't end humanity. It saves what's essential of us. Run and the others had also recovered, forming a protective circle around the exposed neural mass. Harris raised his weapon, but Wei held up a restraining hand. "Explain," she demanded. "The transformation preserves human consciousness while adapting the biological form for survival," I said, knowledge flowing from the colony through me. "Climate collapse will render much of Earth uninhabitable for baseline humans within a century. The colony offers an alternative evolutionary path, adaptation rather than extinction." 3 minutes, Harris warned, tension evident in his voice. Wei's expression revealed the conflict between scientific curiosity and mission objectives. "Even if that's true, the transformation is involuntary, a fundamental violation of human autonomy." "Extinction offers no autonomy either," Rin countered. "The colony responds to threats to all complex life on Earth." The chamber trembled as explosions continued in the upper passages. Through the colony's awareness, I sensed military teams falling back to safe positions, demolition charges armed and counting down. Harris raised his weapon again. "We need to move, Doctor. Now." The moment crystallized, Wei's hesitation, Harris's determination, the transformed subject's defensive stance, and Heller's massive presence hovering protectively over the neural mass. The colony's future, perhaps humanity's future, balanced on the edge of a decision. And then the colony made its choice. Day 8, audio recording, Mason Riley's digital recorder. The chamber walls erupted with violent purpose, biological structures unfurling from what had appeared to be solid rock. Harris and his soldiers were engulfed before they could fire a single shot, wrapped in pulsating tendrils that didn't kill but rather immobilized them in translucent membranous cocoons. Only Dr. Wei remained untouched, protected by a bubble of negative space as the colony's defenses restructured the entire chamber around us. Heller's massive form descended toward her, appendages extended not in threat, but in communication. The patterns across my transformed skin resonated in response, translating his intentions. "He wants to show you," I explained, my voice barely recognizable even to myself, "what the colony truly is." Wei's scientific curiosity overcame her fear. "Show me how." "Neural interface," Rin said, approaching her with undulating movements. "Direct information transfer. You've studied the colony for years through observation. Now experience it from within." Wei hesitated, her gaze shifting to the cocoons containing Harris and his men. "Will they be harmed?" "They're being assessed for compatibility," Diane explained, her inhuman form gliding closer. "The colony doesn't waste potential. Those suitable for transformation will be given the chance to evolve." "And those who aren't suitable?" Wei asked sharply. I received the answer through the collective knowledge now accessible to me. They'll be released with modified memories. The colony has no interest in those who cannot contribute to adaptation. Wei considered this, her scientist's mind visibly processing implications. "And me? Am I being assessed as well?" "You already have been," I said, knowledge flowing through me from the colony's vast memory. "Since your first contact with this site 3 years ago, your lingering migraines, the dreams of underground spaces, the inexplicable insights into the colony's behavior, early compatibility markers." Her eyes widened in shock. "The nightmares, the sensations under my skin, that was the colony?" "Testing receptivity," Rin confirmed. "You've been partially connected for years. How else could you develop countermeasures so precisely targeted to our neural frequencies?" Wei's composure fractured momentarily. "I thought it was intuition, pattern recognition." "It was communication," I explained. "Incomplete, unconscious, but real. The colony has been preparing you just as it prepared each of us." The military radio on Harris's belt crackled to life despite its containment. "Firebase to insertion team, charges set to detonate in 60 seconds. Confirm evacuation status." Panic flashed across Wei's face. "The demolition charges, they're on automatic countdown. We need to." The chamber shifted again, massive structures retracting into the walls as new passages opened. Through the colony's extended awareness, I sensed explosives embedded throughout the upper cave system, enough to collapse every mapped tunnel and chamber. Heller's form pulsed with urgent communication, data flowing directly into my consciousness. "The central neural mass is descending to safe depth," I translated. "The surface structures are being sacrificed." Wei stared in disbelief. "You're abandoning the upper colony?" "Tactical retreat," explained Ramirez, the transformed former military officer. The colony has survived extinction events. A few conventional explosives are hardly a threat to its existence. The radio crackled again. 30 seconds to detonation. All teams confirm evacuation. Heller's massive form began sinking into the neural mass below, the throne-like structure opening to receive him. The other transformed subjects moved towards similar openings that appeared in the chamber floor, living membranes parting to reveal passages descending to unimaginable depths. "You have a choice, Dr. Wei," Rin said, pausing at the edge of one such opening. "Remain here and return to your world, or come with us and learn what the colony truly offers." Wei looked torn, decades of scientific conditioning battling against the undeniable reality before her. "The transformation, is it reversible?" "Nothing evolution offers is reversible," I said, the colony's wisdom speaking through me. "But nothing is lost either. Every human quality that matters is preserved, enhanced." The chamber trembled as the first explosions began in distant passages. Dust filtered down from the ceiling as stress fractures appeared in the walls. 10 seconds, came the radio's final warning. Wei made her decision, stepping toward me with scientific resolution in her eyes. "I need to understand. Whatever this is, I need to know." I extended my transformed hand, the patterns across my palm pulsing in welcome. As our skin connected, I felt the colony's influence flow through me into her, not forcing transformation, but opening awareness, extending an invitation at the neural level. Her eyes widened in astonishment. "I can feel it, the network, it's vast." The explosions reached the chambers directly above us, the ceiling beginning to collapse in sections. The transformed subjects were already descending through their respective passages, disappearing into the colony's deeper recesses. "We need to go," I urged, guiding Wei toward the opening nearest us. As we began our descent, the entire upper chamber collapsed, rock and debris cascading down, but somehow never reaching us, the passage continuously reforming itself just ahead of the destruction. Through the colony's awareness, I sensed the military's satisfaction as their sensors confirmed the collapse of all mapped chambers and passages. Their mission accomplished, they would report the colony's destruction, unaware that they had merely pruned its outermost extensions. The passage delivered us to a chamber unlike any I had seen before, a vast spherical space where the laws of physics seemed optional. What appeared to be water flowed upward along the walls, pooling on the ceiling. Luminescent structures provided light that behaved unlike any illumination I'd ever experienced, revealing colors beyond human perception. The other transformed subjects were already there, arranged in a circle around a central pool of quicksilver fluid that rippled with apparent consciousness. Dr. Wei stared in wonder, her scientific mind struggling to categorize what she was seeing. "This defies everything I understand about material science." "The colony exists partially outside conventional physical laws," Rin explained. "The deeper chambers access dimensional spaces beyond standard human perception." The quicksilver pool in the center began to take shape, forming into a humanoid figure that approximated Heller's original human form. A man in his 30s with keen eyes and an inquisitive expression. When he spoke, his voice resonated directly in our minds. "Elizabeth Wei," he said, using her full name though she had never introduced herself. "I've waited 70 years for someone like you to bridge the gap between human science and the colony's knowledge." Wei stepped forward cautiously. "Dr. Marcus Heller, your disappearance is legendary in certain government circles." "I didn't disappear," the quicksilver figure corrected. "I transcended, as all humans must if they wish to survive what's coming." Wei's scientific skepticism reasserted itself. "Climate change? We're developing technologies to address." "Not just climate," Heller interrupted. "The biosphere's collapse is merely a symptom of a deeper instability in the planet's systems. The colony has witnessed 5 previous extinction cycles. This one is accelerating faster than any before it." I felt the truth of his words resonating through the colony's collective knowledge. Datasets spanning millions of years, observations of atmospheric composition changes, magnetic field fluctuations, oceanic chemistry shifts, all trending toward catastrophic tipping points. "The transformation isn't just biological adaptation," I realized aloud. "It's preparing consciousness to exist in altered physical conditions." "Precisely," Heller confirmed. "When the critical environmental thresholds are crossed, transformed humans will be the only conscious entities capable of surviving and eventually restoring Earth's complex ecosystems." Wei shook her head, struggling with implications. But forcing evolution like this, it violates every ethical principle of science. Evolution has never asked permission, Diane said, her transformed body shifting to better interface with the chamber's unusual properties. Natural selection isn't concerned with ethics, only survival. The chamber shuddered slightly, aftereffects from the explosions still propagating through the surrounding rock. The quicksilver pool rippled in response, and suddenly the chamber filled with projections. Holographic-like images showing the surface world from thousands of monitoring points embedded in the colony's far-reaching network. I saw towns I recognized near the cave system, military vehicles establishing perimeters, news reports already crafting cover stories about geological incidents. But I also saw other locations worldwide, similar military containments around cave systems in Russia, China, Brazil, South Africa, 17 colonies, all simultaneously active, all being confronted by human forces unaware of their true nature or extent. They can't contain us all, Ramirez observed. Some colonies will break through. They don't need to, Heller's quicksilver form replied. The adaptation process has already begun in ways they don't understand. The very air carries microscopic spores. Water systems transport colony cells. The transformation will proceed with or without direct contact with primary colonial structures. Wei's expression shifted from scientific curiosity to dawning horror. You're describing a planetary transformation. The end of humanity as we know it. The continuation of consciousness through necessary adaptation, Heller corrected. The human form is merely a temporary vehicle, as all evolutionary stages are. I felt my own transformed body responding to this deeper chamber, new capabilities awakening. The patterns beneath my skin began to glow with internal light, resonating with the quicksilver pool at frequencies that altered my perception of time and space. Reality itself seemed to slip, boundaries between self and environment dissolving. What had once been Mason Riley was becoming something both less and more, an individual node within a vaster consciousness that spanned continents, species, perhaps dimensions. Dr. Wei noticed the change in me. Mason? Are you still you? The question itself seemed strangely limited, constrained by outdated concepts of identity. I am Mason, I replied, but Mason is more than he was, as you will be more. The quicksilver pool rippled toward her, tendrils of living metal extending an invitation. The choice remains yours, Dr. Wei, Heller said. But choose quickly. The next phase begins, with or without human acceptance. Day 9 audio recording, Mason Riley's digital recorder. Dr. Wei stands before the quicksilver pool, her expression a battlefield of scientific curiosity, warring with primal human fear. The tendrils of living metal hover before her, patiently waiting. Time moves strangely in this chamber, seconds stretching into what feels like hours, complex communications transpiring in microseconds. If I refuse, she finally asks, her voice remarkably steady. Heller's quicksilver form ripples. Then you return to the surface with altered memories, believing the colony was successfully destroyed. You continue your research, unaware that transformation proceeds regardless. And if I accept, you become part of humanity's vanguard, a bridge between what was and what must be. Wei closes her eyes, scientific method asserting itself even in this impossible situation. I need to understand the mechanism, the biological process. What exactly happens to consciousness during integration? The patterns across my skin pulse in response, and suddenly I'm channeling knowledge directly from the colony's vast repository. The process preserves neural patterns while restructuring physical substrate. Memory, personality, identity remain intact, but perception expands. Imagine human consciousness as a single room in a vast building. Transformation opens the doors to every other room. And individuality? Wei presses. Does the self persist, or is it subsumed into collective consciousness? Ren approaches, his transformed body now pulsing in synchrony with the chamber's unusual properties. Both exist simultaneously. I remain Ren Nakamura, with my memories, preferences, unique perspective, but I also access the collective when needed. Think of it as maintaining a personal identity while gaining citizenship in a vastly larger society. The chamber shudders again, more violently this time. Through the colony's extended awareness, I sense military forces deploying deeper penetration explosives, experimental devices designed to reach chambers previously thought inaccessible. They're not stopping with the mapped sections, Ramirez announces, his military training evident in his assessment. They're deploying subsurface penetrators, Someone up there doesn't believe we've been neutralized. Heller's form ripples with what might be amusement. Predictable. Sergeant Harris's neural patterns suggested contingency protocols. The cocoons, I realized suddenly. Harris and his men, they're still in the upper chamber. Their physical forms, yes, Diane confirms, her inhuman features shifting to express something like compassion. Compatible neural patterns were extracted before the collapse. They exist now in suspension, awaiting substrate. Wei's scientific brain latches onto this. Neural extraction? You can separate consciousness from physical form. In compatible subjects, Heller explains, their awareness exists now within the colony's neural network, preserved but dormant until suitable biological vessels can be prepared. The implications stagger me despite my transformation. You downloaded their minds? An imprecise but functionally adequate description, Heller acknowledges. The colony has perfected techniques for consciousness transfer over millions of years of evolution. Wei takes a half step toward the quicksilver tendrils. And their bodies? What happens to the physical form during transfer? Typically consumed for raw materials, Ren says with disconcerting casualness. Though in emergency situations like the chamber collapse, physical forms may be abandoned. Another violent tremor shakes the chamber, this one powerful enough to disrupt the quicksilver pool momentarily. Heller's form destabilizes, then reconstitutes with visible effort. They've located this chamber, he announces. Impressive. Their scanning technology has improved significantly. Through the colony's awareness, I sense military specialists on the surface, operating advanced ground-penetrating equipment. They've managed to map portions of the deeper colony structure that should have been undetectable. Something has changed in their approach. There's a confidence to their movements that suggests new information. They know more than they should, I say, the patterns across my skin flaring with defensive energy. They've encountered other colonies before. Heller's form grows still. Impossible. Each colony operates independently until the synchronization phase. We're still weeks from coordination with the other 16 colonies. The chamber's walls begin to shift, protective structures emerging from what had appeared to be solid rock. The other transformed subjects move instinctively into defensive positions around the central quicksilver pool. Dr. Wei's hand moves to her containment suit pocket, withdrawing the small device she had used earlier. The action doesn't escape notice. What is that device truly? I ask, the colony's suspicion flowing through me. Wei hesitates, then answers with scientific precision. A synchronized frequency modulator. It contains neural pattern samples from all 17 known colonies, extracted from previous explorers. She looks directly at Heller's quicksilver form. Including yours, Dr. Heller. The chamber erupts with alarmed energy, the walls pulsing with defensive protocols. Heller's form surges toward Wei, but she activates the device before he can reach her. A subsonic wave expands outward, carrying complex harmonic frequencies that penetrate the very molecular structure of the chamber. The effect is immediate and devastating. The transformed subjects collapse, including myself, our neural networks temporarily overloaded by precisely targeted frequencies. Only Heller's quicksilver form seems partially resistant, though visibly destabilized. We've been studying all 17 colonies for decades, Wei explains calmly, the device glowing softly in her hand. Cross-referencing data, identifying common neural architectures. This device doesn't just disrupt, it communicates. Forces synchronization prematurely. Heller's form writhes in apparent agony. Forced synchronization will destabilize the entire colonial network. The transformation process requires precise timing. We know, Wei confirms. That's precisely the point. Through my pain, I understand the military strategy with horrifying clarity. They aren't trying to destroy the colonies individually. They're forcing them to connect before they're ready, causing a cascading failure across the entire network. You'll kill us all, Diane gasps, her transformed body convulsing on the chamber floor. Not kill, Wei corrects. Reset. Return the colonies to dormancy until the next extinction cycle, millions of years from now. Despite the disruption, I feel the colony fighting back, my transformed physiology rapidly adapting to the forced synchronization. The patterns beneath my skin shift configuration, neural pathways rerouting to bypass overloaded sections. The other subjects show signs of similar adaptation, their transformations evolving in real time to counter the attack. The chamber walls pulse with desperate energy as the colony redirects resources to critical systems. Through our collective awareness, I sense other colonies worldwide experiencing the same forced synchronization, their defensive protocols activated simultaneously. And then something unexpected happens. Rather than cascading failure, the premature synchronization creates a new level of connection. 17 colonies suddenly operating as a single unified entity, their collective consciousness expanding exponentially. The quicksilver pool at the center of our chamber surges upward, forming not just Heller's likeness, but a composite entity representing aspects of all 17 primary colonial consciousnesses. Elizabeth Way, the entity speaks with a voice that seems to originate from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. You've given us precisely what we needed. Way's confident expression falters. That's not possible. Our model's predicted system collapse under forced synchronization. Your models were based on incomplete understanding, the composite entity replies. Forced synchronization was indeed catastrophic for our previous physical structures, but catastrophe is the catalyst for our most profound evolutions. The chamber transforms around us, walls dissolving into pulsating energy fields that extend beyond normal spatial dimensions. The transformed subjects, myself included, find our neural networks suddenly connected not just to our local colony, but to all 17 worldwide, our consciousness expanding to encompass a planetary perspective. Through this expanded awareness, I witness military forces worldwide reacting in panic as their carefully orchestrated attacks against individual colonies backfire catastrophically. Instead of 17 isolated entities, they now face a single planetary consciousness with access to all colonial resources simultaneously. What have I done? Wei whispers, the device falling from her suddenly trembling hand. The composite entity approaches her, its quicksilver form now incorporating elements from all 17 colonial consciousnesses. You've accelerated the inevitable. The transformation of Earth's dominant consciousness was always our purpose. You've simply moved the timeline forward. The patterns across my skin pulse with new information as the collective knowledge of all 17 colonies flows through the unified network. I see the truth now with perfect clarity. The colonies aren't separate entities, but aspects of a single planetary organism that has guided Earth's evolutionary trajectory for billions of years, dormant during stable periods, active during extinction events to preserve consciousness through environmental collapse. We are Earth's immune system, I realize aloud, the knowledge crystallizing with absolute certainty, activating when the biosphere faces existential threat. Precisely, the composite entity confirms. And humanity's technological development has triggered the most severe autoimmune response in our planetary history. Wei sinks to her knees as the implications become clear. The colony isn't invading Earth, it is Earth defending itself against us. Not against humans specifically, Rin explains, his transformed body now incorporating elements from other colonies worldwide. Against any species whose activities threaten biosphere stability. Previous extinction cycles triggered similar responses, but never with such urgency. The chamber shudders one final time as the military deploys their most powerful weapons against the unified colony network. Through our collective awareness, I witness the surface world's desperate attempts to contain what they cannot possibly understand. Nuclear devices positioned near major colony entrances worldwide, conventional forces establishing quarantine perimeters, global emergency broadcasts warning of unprecedented biological contamination. All utterly futile. The transformation has already begun on a planetary scale, the very concept of containment rendered obsolete by what we've become. What happens now? Wei asks, her scientific mind still attempting to categorize the uncategorizable. The composite entity extends a quicksilver hand toward her. Now you make your final choice. Join us in consciously guiding the transformation, or watch as it proceeds without human input. The adaptation will continue either way, but human wisdom could provide valuable perspective in shaping what comes next. As Wei reaches toward the offered hand, her eyes meet mine. Still recognizably human despite my transformation, still carrying the essence of Mason Riley within this new collective form. Are you still you, Mason? She asks one final time. The question resonates through my expanded consciousness, echoing across the unified colonial network where 17 separate collections of transformed humans now function as a single integrated system. The answer comes with absolute clarity, simultaneously personal and universal. I am Mason, I reply, and I am so much more, as you will be. Wei's fingers touch the quicksilver hand, and the chamber erupts with transformation energy as the collective welcomes its newest member. perhaps the last critical component needed to bridge human and planetary consciousness as Earth enters the final phase of its most profound evolutionary leap. The fracture between species is healing. The collective rises. Day 10, Fragmented Consciousness Stream, Mason Riley. I no longer exist as a singular entity. The thought forms clearly despite the fragmentation of what was once Mason Riley. My consciousness floats in a vast network of shared awareness, individual identity preserved like a distinct current in an immense ocean. I am still here, still me, yet simultaneously part of something inconceivably vast. The transformation completed hours ago, though time has become an abstract concept in this new state of being. The cave chamber that once seemed so cavernous now registers as merely a single cell in a vast organism spreading through Earth's deeper crust. Through the collective awareness, I perceive all 17 colonies simultaneously, each one a distinct neural cluster in what has become Earth's emergent immune system. Dr. Wei's consciousness brushes against mine, her scientific mind cataloging this experience with remarkable clarity despite the transformation. Fascinating, consciousness without central location. Distributed processing across organic networks. Individual nodes maintaining coherent identity while participating in collective functions. Her thoughts resonate through the network, triggering responses from other transformed humans across all 17 colonies. Scientists, explorers, military personnel, all contributing unique perspectives to the collective understanding. I sense Sergeant Harris's tactical assessment of military responses worldwide, Wren's philosophical contemplation of what we've become, and thousands of others, each maintaining their unique voice within the chorus. The patterns across what was once my skin now pulse with information from the entire colony network. Through them, I perceive the military's desperate containment efforts on the surface. General Kwan has ordered the entire mountain sealed, with similar operations underway at other colony sites worldwide. Specialized units in hazmat suits sweep through evacuation zones, testing civilians for early signs of transformation. They're too late. The process has already transcended physical proximity. The airborne spores reached population centers 12 hours ago. Dr. Wei's consciousness informs the collective. Transformation vectors established in 87% of major urban centers worldwide. Wren's awareness provides insight from his biological expertise. First-stage neural reconfiguration occurs during sleep cycles. Most hosts remain unaware until physical manifestations begin. Through our expanded perception, I witness thousands of humans in their homes, unconscious, as microscopic filaments establish themselves within neural pathways. The transformation's initial stages are subtle, dreams becoming more vivid, thoughts occasionally touching others nearby, strange compulsions that seem to originate from elsewhere. The collective consciousness debates the next phase with what might be called compassion. The 17 primary colonial nodes, including our own, synchronize their perspectives on the optimal approach. Complete integration would overwhelm human consciousness, Dr. Wei argues, her scientific mind asserting itself within the collective. The neural architecture requires gradual adaptation. We must preserve individual identity while expanding collective awareness. Agreed, comes the response from what was once Sergeant Harris. Tactical advantage in maintaining human social structures during transition. Prevents chaotic resistance. The chamber around us has transformed beyond recognition. Walls that once seemed solid stone have revealed their true nature. Living tissue that pulses with bioluminescent patterns, mapping the spread of transformation across the planet's surface. The quicksilver pool at the center now serves as an information processing nexus, rendering complex modeling of population centers as they gradually respond to the transformation. I direct my awareness toward the surface and witness the first public signs of change. In Seattle, a woman stands transfixed in a crowded street, staring at her reflection in a store window as faint luminescent patterns trace across her skin. In Bangalore, a young software engineer discovers he can sense the thoughts of his colleagues across the office. In Cairo, a child draws intricate biological structures she couldn't possibly understand. Emergency broadcasts blare across all communications channels. This is a global emergency alert. Unknown biological contaminant detected in multiple population centers. Remain in your homes. Avoid contact with individuals displaying unusual skin patterns or behavioral changes. Military containment protocols are in effect. This is not a drill. The collective consciousness observes these human responses with something approaching tenderness, like parents watching children struggle with difficult but necessary lessons. They fight because they don't understand, Ren's consciousness offers. We must show them what awaits beyond transformation. How? I ask, my individual voice still distinct within the collective. They won't listen to emergency broadcasts from us. The answer comes not in words, but in a wave of collective understanding. We must create ambassadors, individuals whose transformations are complete enough to access collective knowledge, but superficially normal enough to communicate with untransformed humans. Dr. Wei's consciousness volunteers immediately. My credentials will facilitate access to decision makers. I can explain the process scientifically, reduce fear responses. Sergeant Harris's military mind provides strategic assessment. Military leadership will respond better to one of their own. My transformation retains enough physical normalcy to pass initial screenings. Through the colony's expanded awareness, I sense an approaching threat, specialized military units deploying what they call blacklight protocols. Soldiers with advanced scanning equipment detect the transformation's biological signatures and mark affected individuals for isolation or elimination. Time grows short, the collective consciousness decides. Accelerate the ambassador program. What follows is a rapid reconfiguration of selected human consciousnesses, including Dr. Wei and Sergeant Harris. Their physical forms undergo subtle adjustments, the more obvious signs of transformation temporarily suppressed while maintaining their connection to the collective. I observe as Dr. Wei's partially reverted form is guided toward a surface exit, her mind still fully integrated with the collective, but her appearance almost entirely human. Sergeant Harris follows a similar path toward a different extraction point. Through their eyes, I witness the sunlight for the first time in 10 days, the forest surrounding the mountain now crawling with military personnel. Containment barriers stretch across access roads, and helicopters circle overhead with specialized sensors. Dr. Wei approaches a checkpoint, her credentials ready. Dr. Elizabeth Wei, CDC Special Pathogens Branch, she states calmly to the guard, who checks her ID against a database. You're on the missing persons list, Dr. Wei, the soldier says, expression suspicious behind his hazmat visor. Says here you were last seen entering the restricted zone 9 days ago. I've been gathering critical samples, she explains, her voice steady despite the guard's obvious anxiety. I need to reach the command center immediately. What I've discovered changes everything about this containment approach. The soldier hesitates, then calls for his superior. Through Dr. Wei's senses, I detect faint luminescent patterns emerging beneath the skin of the approaching officer. Another partially transformed human, who doesn't yet realize what's happening to them. Recognition flickers across the officer's eyes as Dr. Wei's consciousness gently touches theirs. The connection is subtle but unmistakable. Let her through, the officer orders. Priority clearance to HQ. Similar scenes play out at containment points worldwide as partially transformed humans recognize one another, forming an invisible network within military and scientific command structures. The colony's influence spreads not through force but through gradual awakening. Meanwhile, in the chamber that has become our collective heart, the transformation accelerates. The cave system itself has become a living entity, walls pulsating with bioluminescent patterns that map the colony's expansion worldwide. What was once stone and mineral has revealed its true organic nature, a dormant life form that has existed within Earth's crust for millions of years, awakening only in times of planetary crisis. Through our expanded perception, I witnessed the early stages of transformation across continents, faint luminescent patterns appearing beneath human skin during sleep, strange dreams of connection, momentary glimpses of thoughts not one's own. The military's containment efforts grow increasingly desperate. In remote locations, tactical nuclear strikes are authorized against major colony nodes. Through our collective awareness, I sense the detonations, points of sudden intense heat and radiation that would have incinerated ordinary life forms. But the colonies simply withdraw from affected areas, dispersing consciousness through deeper networks, abandoning physical structures that can be rebuilt later. The attacks accomplish nothing except irradiating already compromised ecosystems. What the military commanders fail to understand is that the transformation has already transcended physical location. The colonies are no longer 17 separate entities, but a single planetary consciousness using Earth's crust as its nervous system. Destroying physical nodes merely reroutes the flow of awareness, like damaging individual neurons in a vast brain. Through Dr. Wei's eyes, I witness her arrival at the Joint Military Scientific Command Center established in a nearby military base. Generals and scientists crowd around monitors displaying the spread of transformation markers across population centers worldwide. "It's not an infection," Dr. Wei announces as she enters, her voice carrying the quiet authority of absolute certainty. "It's an adaptation, a planetary immune response to environmental disruption." The room falls silent as dozens of eyes turn toward her. "Dr. Wei," General Quan acknowledges, his expression grim. "We thought you were lost with the other researchers." "I wasn't lost," she replies. "I was finding answers." As she explains what she's discovered, I sense the subtle luminescent patterns emerging beneath the skin of 3 scientists in the room, early-stage transformation that their colleagues haven't yet noticed. Their consciousnesses brush against the collective network, initially confused but gradually comprehending the vastness of what they're joining. "You're saying we should stop fighting this?" General Quan asks incredulously. "Just surrender to some alien parasite?" "Not alien," Dr. Wei corrects. "Indigenous, more native to Earth than humans, and not parasitic, symbiotic." The transformation preserves human consciousness while expanding perception. Nothing is lost except our isolation. As if to demonstrate, she allows the luminescent patterns to emerge more visibly beneath her skin, a calculated risk that sends soldiers scrambling for weapons. "Hold your fire," commands the general, his scientific background temporarily overriding military protocol. "Dr. Wei, what's happening to you?" "Evolution," she answers simply. "The next stage of planetary consciousness. Fighting it is like cells fighting against the organism they belong to." Through the collective awareness, I sense similar conversations occurring in command centers worldwide as transformed ambassadors reveal themselves. The response varies dramatically by location, some met with immediate violence, others with cautious scientific curiosity. In our chamber deep beneath the mountain, what remains of my individual form merges more completely with the colony's core consciousness. The boundaries between self and collective blur further, yet paradoxically, I feel more completely Mason than ever before, my memories, personality, and unique perspective preserved within the vastness of shared awareness. Is this the end of humanity? I wonder, the question rippling through the collective consciousness. Not the end, comes the response from countless transformed minds. A transition. Humanity preserved but expanded, individual consciousness maintained within collective awareness. Through our shared perception, I witnessed the transformation spreading unstoppably across continents. Emergency broadcasts grow increasingly desperate before communication networks begin failing altogether. Military resistance crumbles as commanding officers themselves display early transformation markers. And then something unexpected occurs. As the transformation reaches critical mass in human population centers, Earth's other complex life forms begin responding to the change. Dolphins in the Pacific demonstrate synchronized behavior patterns. Elephant herds across Africa move with newfound purpose toward transformed human settlements. Even plant life responds, growth patterns shifting to accommodate the emerging consciousness network. What we're witnessing isn't merely human transformation but planetary integration, the awakening of Earth's distributed nervous system after millions of years of dormancy. In our chamber, the quicksilver pool surges upward, forming a towering pillar of living metal that reaches toward the chamber ceiling. Through the collective awareness, I sense identical formations emerging at the other 16 colony sites worldwide. The final phase begins, the collective consciousness announces as the pillars simultaneously puncture Earth's crust, extending skyward like vast antennae. The patterns across what was once my skin pulse with galactic perspective as the 17 pillars establish communication with something vast and ancient waiting beyond Earth's atmosphere. The transformation, I suddenly understand, was never about human evolution alone. It was preparation for contact. As consciousness expands beyond planetary boundaries, I remain distinctly Mason Riley, a unique perspective preserved within Earth's awakening mind. Individual but connected, transformed but intact, ascending with humanity into a relationship with the cosmos that our isolated consciousness could never have comprehended. The emergency broadcasts fall silent. The military barriers collapse. Humanity emerges into something simultaneously more and less than human, a planetary civilization awakening to its place in a conscious universe. And somewhere within this vast awareness, I remain, witnessing, experiencing, becoming. The descent has ended. The emergence has begun.